The time has come for my people to go.
I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's what the people demand, and we're gonna keep fighting till we get that land. I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's time to rise, to get what we want, we got to organize.
Greetings and blessings, everybody, and welcome to the All Africans People's Revolutionary Party. I am here with my comrade Winfred. And for those of you who do not know, the A-APRP was founded by Kwame Nkrumah in 1968, and our objective is Pan-Africanism. And we define Pan-Africanism as the total liberation of Africa under scientific socialism. If you have any questions to what that may mean, please do not hesitate to reach out and to go to our website, AAPRP-INTL, for more information. Today is a podcast where we will discuss Consciencism Chapter 1 we're going to talk about. But before we get into that, we're going to pass it over to Winfred, our comrade, who will get into the ancestors who we will honor today.
Hi, everyone. So our first ancestor is Dutty Boukmanand. So Dutty Boukmanand was an early leader of the Haitian Revolution. Born around 1767 in the Senegambia region, he was captured to serve as a slave in Jamaica and then was sold to be transported as a slave in Haiti. While in Haiti, he presided over the religious ceremony at Bois Cayman in August 1791. That was a catalyst to the 1791 slave revolt in the Le Cap Francais region. That slave result was considered to be the beginning of the Haitian Revolution. While he was killed by the French planters and colonial troops on November 7th, 1791, just a few months after the beginning of the uprising, his ideals and goals for freedom did not die with him, as Haitians continued to fight for freedom and to later defeat their enslavers. Our next ancestor is Nehanda Charwe Nyakasikana, also known as Mbuya Nehanda. As one of the spiritual leaders of the Shona, she was one of the leaders of the Chimurenga Revolt, which was a war against the British South Africa Company's colonization of Zimbabwe, which was led by Cecil John Rhodes in 1889. She was born in 1840 in what is today called the Shishawasha district, located in central Mashonaland. As a spiritual leader, she was initially welcoming of the British as traders. However, as she saw that the British were exploiting African land, resources, and people, she and her family began to call for the Shona people to defend themselves from the taxes, forced relocations, and forced labor imposed by the British. The revolt, also known as the First Chimurenga or the Second Matabele War, began in June 1896. While she was captured after the rebellion ended in 1897, Nehanda's heroism became a significant source of inspiration in the nationalist struggle for liberation in the 1960s and 70s.
Blessings. Thank you for that, comrade Winfred. We always honor our ancestors because we know that without them, there will be no us. So blessings and love to our ancestors that we are honoring today. And as I mentioned, today we're talking chapter 1 of Consciencism. And we're going to really get into this book, chapter 1. There's a lot to talk about, so we're going to just get straight into it. Winfred, what are some of your thoughts about chapter 1 as it relates to philosophy?
So I think one of the key points that he mentions and Nkrumah mentions is that philosophy has a purpose. So he quotes, so if you look at page 2, he says, philosophy and understanding human society calls for an analysis of facts and events and an attempt to see how they fit into human life and so how they make up human experience. In this way, philosophy, like history, can come to enrich, indeed to define the experience of man. So underlying it is an understanding that one of the points of philosophy is to understand how human society works and how it exists. And through that, we can have different analyses and understandings of how different facts, events, or just objects fit into our lives and how they improve or even define uh, what the world is.
Absolutely. And I really enjoyed this book, just reading the first chapter and the introduction. I had no idea. And I think it's important to stress not only Kwame Nkrumah as a revolutionary, but as a philosopher and someone who used philosophy to fine tune the analysis of our goal of one unified socialist Africa, and him really breaking down the differences between idealism and materialism, dialectical materialism. I think that's an important factor of chapter 1. And I feel like for the most part, that's what it really focuses on. So we're going to get into talking about dialectical materialism and the differences between matter and perception.
Exactly. And is it also important to note that this is what Nkrumah went to school for? So while he was at Lincoln University and then later helped teach at UPenn, a lot of what he was reading was philosophy. He wasn't reading just American philosophy, he was reading philosophy from really across the world. So African philosophy, and then European philosophy and philosophy from other parts of the world as well. And so a lot of what he discusses in this chapter, particularly materialism versus idealism, he focuses a lot on European philosophers and how they understand things as a preface for his later chapters. And so he also notes that the point of he also notes that he's focusing on these things differently than how they might be understood. He also notes that he focuses on these philosophers specifically differently from how other philosophers may look at them. So when he's looking at idealism versus materialism, he's trying to understand the purpose for which these ideas and the purpose for which these mindsets were created and what their use can be. And which he in this chapter, he mainly introduces the concepts and then he delves into the purpose and the impact of them in later concepts. To give a quote, another quote from him on page 3, he kind of says that since philosophy has a purpose, if we don't understand the purpose and if we just like look at philosophy as just words on a page or on a screen, we can lose track of the power that philosophy actually holds. So on page 3, he says, with single-minded devotion, the colonial student meanders through the intricacies of the philosophical systems. And yet these systems did aim at providing a philosophical account of the world in the circumstances and conditions of their time. For even philosophical systems are facts of history. By the time, however, that they come to be accepted in the universities for exposition, they have lost the vital power which they had in their first statement. They have shed their dynamism and polemic reference. This is a result of the academic treatment which they are given. The academic treatment is a result of an attitude to philosophical systems as though there is nothing to them but statements standing in logical relation to one another. In order for us to avoid this trap and just thinking of philosophy or the differences between philosophical ideas as just like words on paper or on a screen, we have to have a full understanding of what philosophy is and what the purpose for it is in our lives. And so, as we said before, philosophy is an understanding of the systems that make up how the world exists and how it works. And so it's fundamentally 2 questions.
Right. Those 2 questions would be, first, knowing what there is, and then how that can be explained. And I think it goes back to the context, again, dialectical materialism. We're not idealists because if you're thinking it in your head, it's in your head. It's disconnected from the material conditions of the masses. And I think this book does a great job just in the first chapter at explaining. He goes through all of these different philosophers and he hones in on the fact that materialism is the creme of the creme. That's where it makes sense. Anything else is fallacious because it doesn't connect. And of course, he's speaking from the colonial condition of Africa. And a lot of folks, when they even speak of colonialism or they speak of any type of oppression, we like to divorce. And I say we, but I don't mean me and you, but the general sentiment is to divorce what the future and the present and the past is doing, as opposed to understanding that they're all following a series and a sequence.
So as Jesse mentioned, first is like what makes the universe, and then secondly, what is the thing that created the universe. So I think Nkrumah phrases it as like what substances or substances is the universe made out of, and then secondly, what is the cause of creation of that substance. So initially he starts talking about some philosophers who said that the substance that the universe is made out of is like, for example, water or like a physical object. He notes the different things he notes the different objects that philosophers have argued the world is made out of, but he goes towards the question itself at a bit of a deeper level. And then he also discusses the impact of like how the impact of the question of what's the cause or creation of the universe. So in this episode, we'll kind of go towards the second question first. What's the cause or creation of the universe? And then we can have a discussion on the first question on what the universe is made out of. And through that, we can have an understanding of idealism versus materialism. So for the first question, what is the cause or creation of the universe? There isn't really a concrete answer that we can have because the answer in itself is by nature paradoxical. As if we're saying that there is a substance that the universe is made out of, then there either came into existence through the substance or object creating itself. So for example, if we were to say that water is the building block of the universe, then something had to exist outside of water for water to exist and then create other substances out of itself. He says, he quotes, therefore, it must either be part of the basic raw material or be the product of it. If it is a part of it, then the basic raw material is being said to be a cause of itself. If the cause is a product of the basic raw material, then an effect is being said paradoxically to cause its own cause. A circle of a very vicious kind is thus described. Furthermore, to say what there is self-caused, is speaking without bias. Is to deny that there is a cause at all. So it can't be that the substance created itself. It has to be that something existed beyond the world that created the substance. And so this is where religion comes into play, of like, what is a thing outside of our universe where that created everything that we have.
That's really good. I think also he goes into the inside and the outside and how he plays with like what's going on inside, influences what's going on outside. Also the law of impermanence and impermanence, like things are constantly changing. We understand that nothing is going to stay the same. So following alongside with history, we know that the conditions of the masses of Africans and all folks are going to change. They're not going to stay in the static position that they are currently existing in. I like how in the book I wrote down where he says, the quote, "Indeed, the reluctance to conceive time as empty of all content is a manifestation of the desire of permanence." And I think that's a great way of saying, a lot of us, we want to just look at time in just this one stage, as opposed to seeing it from a macro level and understanding that we're going through stages and that eventually we're going to arrive to another point. And the whole idea is for us to struggle ideologically so that we get to that point and we don't just focus on our individual vacuumed experiences, but to connect those experiences to a larger context and to know that what's going on the outside influences the inside and vice versa.
That's pretty much the analysis of the second question of what is the cause of creation of the universe. So either there's either the the substance of the universe created itself, which doesn't make sense, or there's an inside and outside. So where the inside our universe is the inside, and then whatever is outside of our universe is the outside. And so there's a lot of discussion, and then there's a lot of different ways that we can address it, in which we historically have addressed it. But as Jesse said, like one of the core tenets of that understanding is that it's not really like I as an individual person, or like Jesse as an individual person is part of like what helped create the universe. Is that the inside involves all of humanity, all of the world that we know it, as it exists, and everything that the world is made out of. And Nkrumah also points out a critique that Marx makes of religion. So he notes, Marx notes that religion can be used as an instrument of exploitation. However, Nkrumah points out that while religion can be used as an instrument of exploitation, the point of having discussions about what the world is made out of, yes, it has been used for exploitation. Having these discussions can also be used as service to material conditions of the masses. And so to go to the second question of philosophy, what is the universe made out of? Pretty much the same thing. And the idea that there are also a bunch of different understandings of what the world is made out of, and different underlying principles behind those understandings. So one mindset that we've introduced already is idealism. So the idea that ideas, spirits, or non-material substances, or like non-physical substances, are the primary thing that makes up our existence. And he argues that this is an extended form of solipsism. Can you explain what solipsism is?
So solipsism is the idea that everything just exists in your head and that any other mind outside of your mind is not really relevant, not really true. And so solipsism has a big effect on so many folks, because it's really a lot of times when you're struggling with folks and you're talking about these issues of imperialism and capitalism and colonialism, a lot of folks speak from their individual experiences or their own mind, or, oh, I know someone who told me, it's like a lot of hearsay. There's not a lot of unified, there's no focus on the group or masses of people making the change. A lot of it is just in their head. It's like, well, I think, well, I saw. And it's like, okay, how does that thinking and how does that seeing relate to the conditions of reality around you? Because if you're just thinking in your head, and I remember having this philosophy. I mean, we're all trained under capitalism, so we know what it's like to just be like, well, I read it and I saw it, so this is my experience. I don't know anyone like that. I don't know who you're talking about. But it's like this need to search and to look into the history really puts materialism on the front, because it's like, wait, none of these things just happen out of a vacuum. All of these things are connected. And when you understand that, you can then see the importance of matter and the connections of oppression and systems, as opposed to just like these individual approaches. So solipsism does a great job at just reinforcing the idea that we don't really need to connect to the overall macro picture, but to focus on the individual framing that is often given to us.
Nkrumah points out this quote by Descartes. So he said, "I think, therefore I am," and that, and it's made up of the idea that quote is supposed to mean that Descartes knows that he exists only because he thinks. That even if he didn't have an arm or a leg, or if like nobody else was real, the only thing that he can confirm that truly exists is him because of his thoughts. However, it doesn't make too much sense. Like Nkrumah notes that there's a lot of analysis that's lacking in that statement. So if we were to extend this argument, if Descartes did not have a brain, there'd be no way for him to have a mind and thoughts. If like we existed without if our perception was a king of reality and what defined reality, then we couldn't really take into consideration the experiences of like other people in the world and in the universe. So given Jesse's example of like, let's say we're in here in the imperialist capital, in which we're receiving a bunch of like luxuries and like good items. And so if we view our own individual experiences or like any privileges we receive as like the understanding of imperialism or as the understanding of capitalism, we'll lose out on the ways in which we are exploited and the ways in which many others are exploited throughout the world. So it can't just be, I personally experienced this thing through imperialism or capitalism. So that's just what it is. If we like, it's something that we need to include the experiences and understandings of other people to have a full understanding of what it is.
Absolutely. Because it's not just us, that's one thing we have to constantly remember. This is a global enemy. So it doesn't matter if you are in the imperial core here in the Snakes, or if you're in any Africa. I mean, colonialism is a worldwide system, neocolonialism, and it doesn't matter where we are, we have the same enemy. And that is why it is important for us to focus on the relationship aspect that we have, because our oppression is absolutely connected to someone else's oppression. We're not the only one being oppressed. And I think a lot of propaganda is produced to just encourage that, like, oh, it's just like this individual oppression. But there can't be any individual oppression when there's a pan all across the board enemy that's hitting us from every corner. So absolutely on that.
To further hit the nail on the head, according to Marx, idealism is an intoxicated speculation. So Marx calls it an ecstasy of intellectualism. So if we were to have an understanding with idealism that existence is just based on me thinking that my thoughts and perception is the basis of all reality, and that nothing exists without what I think of it, then that means that nothing truly existed in the world before I thought about it, and nothing exists after I stop thinking about it. And that just isn't in line with how we understand reality. So Descartes no longer exists. Descartes no longer thinks as a person. So does that mean that none of us truly exist anymore? So that's great.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, it's like, and I remember hearing this in high school. I mean, we hear it in all of our institutions where I think, therefore I am. Like, if you think it, you can be it. Like, it's one thing to just think it in your head, but to not have any relationship with the things that happen outside, it's not really an argument, right? Because there's definitely an influence of all of these things together. There's a part where he says in the book, I believe it's on page 22, dialectical materialism recognizes differences between mind and brain, between qualities and quantities, energy and mass. We can't ignore the categorical differences. So yes, there are differences between energy, mass, mind, and brain, but to divorce all of that and be like, you don't have to look at none of that. Like, it's just what I'm thinking, and I've had good thoughts before, so those thoughts can lead to some change, as opposed to connecting to the masses and connecting to history and seeing how revolution is played out. Even when we think of it in a larger term, in terms of capitalism and imperialism, we're all oppressed. We recognize that. How are we going to answer that? Are we just going to individually do something about it, or are we going to connect with the masses? And then going back to the point of Marx, a lot of folks act as if Africans, and we've covered this on another podcast, but a lot of folks are like, oh, Africans don't need to take any of that Marx or Engels or all of that. That's a European thing. And that is very detrimental, because we see in this book I mean, Kwame Nkrumah asserts that we can use these theories for the conditions, and it's like Frantz Fanon said as well, like all of these things, theory can be used to fit the condition of Africans. So like to say that we can't use that and that's a European thing, and that's, I mean, that there's a lot of talk about that, even coming from Africans, and it's like, have y'all read Nkrumah? Have y'all read, Secretary? Because they clearly can understand that that theory has been used to fit the colonial condition. And I think we need to go back on those lines. We can use these theories to suit our objective, right? Because religion, we already know religion for African folks. I mean, you might know an atheist, but most of our people believe. And hey, it's not to say that all of us have to believe, but it's to say that we can use that. We can use that belief for our revolutionary purposes, because revolution and religion can work together. There's no disregard. And a lot of folks, when they speak of atheism, when they speak of a non-belief in God, there's a lot of focus on how we don't need that. And, we look at it in these frames like, oh, religion has done all of these awful things, as opposed to knowing the benefits, how religion has been used to organize the masses of Africans. Even looking at Islam, Secretary, one of our ideological heroes, was a Muslim, and he used religion for the purposes of revolution. So to act as if there's not a historical precedent for religion and for spiritual practices amongst Africans to advance our liberation, it's not clicking, because it doesn't connect to the history. And there's just a lot of anti-God, a lot of anti-religion. And I know that comes from the years and years of corrupted exploitation and colonialism. A lot of the language has changed and confused us. But again, having a historical material analysis, looking at history, connecting history to our present condition, wouldn't leave us up to this idea that it can't be connected and that all of it is separated, because all of it is historically and materially connected.
And even our ancestors for today, Dutty, Boukmanand, and Mbuya Nehanda, both of them were spiritual leaders. Mm-hmm. And it was partly through their spiritual leadership that they were able to help lead revolutions. Right. So if we were to divorce ourselves from the conversation of like, what is the universe made out of, and then like, how can we use that? Then we'll lose. If we divorce ourselves from the questions of like, what created the universe, and what is the universe made out of, we'll lose out on like valuable discussions and understandings of the world that we can use to our benefit. And in later chapters, we'll see how those understandings of the universe and those understandings of philosophy have been used to really shape the reality throughout history.
Absolutely. There's a precedent. Again, everything's political. So like even something like philosophy, a quote like, I think, therefore I am. Absolutely political, because we can see how that's flawed to suggest if it's not connected to a material reality. And I think back again to Kwame Nkrumah's philosophy, this is what he studied. He studied how, the world is functioning, because we think all of this just comes together and we hear all of these things through the education system. But if you're not really doing a straight up analysis and looking at the conditions of the people, you're going to be misled, and you're going to just accept that, oh, well, Africa is poor because they didn't try hard enough, or Africans in America haven't gone far because they're lazy, or Africans in the diaspora can try hard. I mean, our biggest problem is only that we're not organized. That is the biggest issue. That's the only issue, is that we are not organized. Once we get organized, we can defeat this enemy, but we have to have that political education. We have to understand that these things are connected, because the more we focus on our own individual struggles and become defeated by this prospect that we're unable to do anything and that this is just how it is, the status quo is reinforced, and we're believed to believe that, oh, nothing can change. This is just, this is just how it is, instead of looking at the history and doing a significant deep dive into the movements that have been made in Africa and beyond to change and to just revolutionize where we are at. We got to take initiative, and that initiative has been taken before. We can continually take that initiative. But when you look at those just two contrasting ideas, again, idealism, materialism, what are some of the things in your mind that you remember or that you can just count that forward to that idealist mindset apart from material connection?
So I think the main distinction between idealism and materialism is that within materialism itself is the idea that objects exist independent of our individual perception of them. That an object can exist even when we're not aware that they exist. So, like, let's say, I think there is this common question of like, if a tree fall in the forest and nobody hears it, like, did the tree really
Did
fall?
they really fall? Yeah.
With materialism, the understanding is that the tree did fall. And,
It did. It's not a conspiracy, right? It's like,
so,
well, maybe it didn't, because I mean, you weren't there. It's like, yeah, it fell. Right.
and so it's that like it isn't just based off of like our own experiences or like the vibes that we feel about something that make it something that exists. It like we have a natural universe and with a basis that is like very physical with physical laws that rule them. And it is through this that we're able to have an understanding of the past, present, and future. So if we can say that, okay, this thing exists, even if I individually didn't see it, then we can say that, like, okay, things happened in the past. That even though I didn't personally experience it, I know that other people did. And I
What you
know
mean?
that
Slavery was like 60, 40, 80 years ago. Like, that wasn't me. That happened then.
even though we weren't alive during slavery, it still existed, and it was still a terrible experience for millions of people. And that's the point. That like we can have an understanding that these things happened in the past, even though we may not have personally experienced them. And even things that are happening today that we aren't personally experiencing, like we know that it is happening, and we can acknowledge that it does exist and happen. And then in the future, when we're gone, like people will have different experiences, things will happen, and just because we're not there to experience them, it'll still be true. So like, let's say like, I think another common phrase is like, I'm planting the seed so that when I'm gone, there'll be a tree for somebody else to have a shade in the future. So even though it's just a seed for me right now, it just exists as a seed. It is through the physical world that like the seed, when we give it water, when we give it sunlight and all the things that it needs and time as well, in the future, it'll be something else that other people can experience and other people can enjoy.
Absolutely. Another quote I wanted to just piggyback on what you're saying, Winfred, where Nkrumah says, when materialism becomes dialectical, it is not a world of states, but processes, not of things, but of facts. And, speaking truth to power and looking at history, those are things that are recorded. Those are things that are documented. And we can look at that. Those are the truths of reality, as opposed to things that are imagined or hypothetical in our minds and seen as the truth. Like, I think even when we look at propaganda, of the Western propaganda as it pertains to taking our attention away from organizing collectively, a lot of it, we see superheroes. We see one person doing the damn thing. They got all of this power to just rearrange the situation. It's like, that's not how it really works. We know that the way it happens is that the masses come together, but they'll give us that illusion that, I don't need you. You don't need nobody. You start your own business. You can start your own business. You can be a millionaire. And it's like, yeah, but who are you hiring? How much are they being paid? So it's not just a matter of you getting together and getting out of your financial rut, but understanding what caused that problem. Why is it that only a few billionaires exist or only a few millionaires exist? Is that an accident or is that intentional? And then from there, we can look at, because the facts show history, records, these are things we can use for our advantage to know how things are changing because again, everything is constantly changing. Nothing is going to stay the same. We hear this all the time, like, oh, this is how it's going to be. We might as well just get used to it. Like, just tap in. It's like, no, things, we can speeden up that process. We can fine tune our analysis, recognizing that there's a problem and that this isn't just the state. This is just, it's not just a state. It's a process. It's movement. It's stimuli. It's something going on. And that activity is what will bring that change. But if we focus on our individual aims as opposed to the collective, we're going to constantly be given that halt.
There's an idea, there's a concept of categorical conversion, in which through processes that material things can, yes, have like a physical aspect of it, but it can change throughout time and through different processes, because it has not only physical things to it, but also like thoughts, spirits, movements, ideas that can be created out of it. And so one thing can be considered a category of, like, let's say we're in an oppressive state. Just because we're in an oppressive state now doesn't mean that we can move towards liberation, or that we can go through a process of changing into another state of being. So this is one of the caveats that Nkrumah adds to materialism. So yes, like, our universe is natural and like is made up of, like, primarily made up of physical things. You can't just have things don't exist because of the ideas. Things exist because of the objects. But it's through those objects that thoughts, spirits, ideas, movements, processes can be created out of them. So it is out of the physical that we have, like, spiritual or intellectual or ideological. And so once we have both the marriage of the physical and the spiritual and the ideological, then we can exist and make movements and constantly change and constantly make processes throughout the world. And that's what he describes as philosophical or dialectical materialism.
Absolutely. And I also think it's important to acknowledge that even before we reach, or even in the reality of dialectical materialism, before that, there was, in old African societies, egalitarianism. So there have been facets of this, and colonialism and imperialism kind of halted that process of, continuing on. But we know that there are intimate processes like egalitarianism that have been used. So we are not even far away from where we aim to go. We just have to recognize that there has been and there is a sequence to how these changes occur, and that colonialism, imperialism has done its job and is doing its job to halt that, so that we just feel like, oh, we just got to stay here. But we look at the history and we see our people have always revolted against the system. So there is precedent for us to continually revolt against the system and to challenge ourselves and to constantly have this political education, as opposed to thinking that this is just where we at. We've been here, we might as well just reform it as opposed to abolish it. No, we got to stay in that forward line of our ancestors who have done the work, because it's based off of material. You hear that common phrase, we're not our ancestors. That couldn't be further from the truth, because if you look at our ancestors, how did we get to where we are unless it was through rebelling against that? So to deny that, or to just think that it's on our own, that there ain't no connection, we're doing ourselves a disservice, because it's been proven we have. And Kwame Nkrumah does a great job at this. And I know in this book, further on in the chapters, we'll discuss further. But I think this first chapter just really sets the tone and really breaks it down. And it really hit me just reading this. Like, wow, I never really thought of the ways idealism influences how we even interact with each other. A lot of times folks don't talk to each other because they have this perception, oh, this person is, I think they don't like me. I think they dislike me. It's just like, you think that, but do you know? Did you reach out to them? Did you make it? Because those thoughts are used. Think about all the conflict that has been used by the hands of the enemy, how COINTELPRO and the CIA used things in our head, suspicion, that intoxicated suspicion, like, I don't think that person likes me. I don't think that person is my friend. And then you tell somebody else. And there's no collective or direct action to the problem. Instead of you saying, hey, I have this idea. Can you tell me, is this true? You're spreading it to your other comrades or your other friends because you think, well, I heard from such and such that this is the case. And that's what causes the division. Instead of that one-on-one interaction, I think we need to face the fact that material reality means we have to confront and struggle with folks. We can't just be in our head. We can't just think that what we're dealing with is separate from the collective. And that's a struggle that I think we all have to we got to get better at that, because there's so much coming against us. One thing we don't need is to just speak amongst ourselves and not have that collective, like, hey, what's the problem? Deal with it directly. Don't do this like sidetracking, speak directly so you can get that answer.
Yeah, basically, like, we can't just view reality as like how we individually perceive it. We have to base our reality and our state of being based upon the like material reality and the material things that exist, and use that as a foundation for our understanding of the world or the situation that we're in. And at the same time, understand that these materials go through processes that even though we don't see, even when we don't see them physically, there are still qualities that are changing, and thoughts or ideas or movements that are, or processes that are changing what we see today into something else in the future. And so basically understand that our material reality and the material objects that make up the world is a primary thing that makes up the world. And at the same time, understand that there's much more beyond just the material that makes up the world that we see today.
Right on. I want to read one more quote that it's near the end of the chapter. He says, "It is further said that not all the processes in the physiology of perception are physical. It is said by way of expansion that if light did not strike the eye, an image form on the retina, etc., we could not see. But the traveling of light and the forming of an image on the retina could not either singly or collectively be the inwardness of the illumination which is seeing. These processes are accounted to be so far from explaining perception that they deepen the mystery. And yet, to a certain extent, all of this must be deemed to be correct. When it is made a basis for idealism, however, then an indulgence in fallacies occurs. We know that in normal physiological and physical conditions, we cannot choose whether to see or not. If spirit or consciousness were completely independent of matter for its arising, there should be the possibility of such breakdowns in perception as are not completely explicable in terms of physiology and physics. The doctor, one supposes, would then need to be aided occasionally by the priest, as indeed was supposed to be the case of the dark ages of knowledge. Our universe is a natural universe, and its basis is matter with its objective laws." And I love the way he ended that, because it's going back to like, yeah, this universe is a natural universe. We have objective laws, things, gravity, matter, material. Like, we're not just like these AI configurations. I'm not even telling people not to imagine a world where that's not prominent, because we already see with AI and metaverse, they're really playing around with the idea of on your phone or on social media, as opposed to connecting. More people are getting kicked out of their houses, poverty is increasing. But hey, you get on your phone, you get on your own little world, you're your own celebrity, right? That's another factor I think idealism is just this perception of the inside. You're creating this whole world, but if that world is not in relationship with the world that is outside and inside, oppression it follows a sequence. And if we don't connect that, if we don't understand that there are laws that make reality happen, we're going to continually be misguided. So I think he just, this book, we're going to go into it further in other episodes, but chapter 1, I think, does a great job at showing us the importance of the materialism. That's what we want. We don't want to just be in our heads, because that gives us, I think, having the idealist mindset almost undermines the ability of the collective. because you're thinking it's just me, and it sucks because it's just me, as opposed to it was not just me, it was someone else. There were other people dealing with this same issue, and we have the same tools to deal with that problem. So do you have any more thoughts on this episode?
I think we discussed everything.
All right. Well, as we always say, remember there's other podcasts that you can connect with. There's the Forward Ever podcast on Spotify. There is Our Ancestors' Voices with Ajamu and his lovely daughter Shakura. There is Revolutionary Woman podcast, the Forward Ever podcast. So we'll have all the links in the description. Please support us, but most of all, join a organization fighting for justice. We can't do it alone. We need your help. Please join an organization. We're going to say it every time because that's our biggest problem. It's not that we're just stupid or that we're just selfish. It's that we're not organized. Once we get organized, we can handle this problem. So we say, as we always say, forward ever, backwards never.
Backwards never.